Hi, and welcome to another edition of Probeline. I'm your host, Reid Haughey. I want to thank the good people down at the Thrift Shop for making this and other programs at GrassRoots possible through a generous annual grant. Probeline is here to help you get to know the folks who are running for elected office in Aspen a little bit better. And today we have a relative newcomer to politics, Rachel Richards, and we're going to spend some time getting to know her a little bit better. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Reid. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks.
Oh, it's fantastic to be here.
Yeah. So, as a relative newcomer to politics, when did you first run for office, and which office was it?
Okay, I first ran, or I was elected in the spring of 1991. I ran for a city council seat. I was very proud to have obtained that as I turned 30. And Eve Homeyer was my treasurer. Eve caught me in the produce section of City Market and said we'd been at some
Where
meetings.
she does some of her best, or did some of her best corralling.
Yeah, I bet. I think so. And just offered that, if I wanted to get involved, she'd like to support me. And I picked up on the next dial with her. I said, I have been thinking about that.
Right.
And so we sat and talked issues and make sure there was enough agreement. And it was great to work with Eve and get to know her.
Why did she seek you out?
I had become involved in a number of issues locally as a volunteer, first starting with the Clean Air Advisory Board and then also the Housing Board. But prior to all that, when people ask, where did you really get started? I was living in Aspen Village. We had a mobile home there. And my ex-husband was complaining about the Burnt Mountain expansion that was on tap. And I said, well, hey, I read there's this public meeting. Why don't you go and say some of these concerns you have about wildlife or the need and mediocre skiing? And he said, oh, I can never do that. And I said, well, I'll make you a deal. You write a letter for the public record, and I'll go to the meeting and say something. Wow. And that's when I first met Dottie Fox and Joy Caudill and Connie Harvey. And I spoke about the concerns with too much growth. And I think they were like, oh, some new blood, come on in. And I just started getting involved with that. And Pickens County appointed me to their wildlife task force because they put that together to look at habitat fragmentation and other concerns.
So that really was, the wildlife task force in Burnt Mountain was kind of what got you up out of the chair to get involved.
That is, and I've also pointed out that Pickens County at the time, Colette Penn was one of the county commissioners, and with Colorado Mountain College, they were sponsoring a series called Hard Choices.
Right.
And I think the premise was unlimited demands, limited resources, therefore hard choices. And as I attended a few of those, and it certainly came from watching your child grow up and thinking about their future, it just stirred that spark.
Yeah. So that was a while ago.
Yes.
And then since then you've been a council
I've been a council
commissioner,
member and mayor of Aspen.
Mayor. And now back to council.
Yes.
After leaving the commission.
With any luck at all and a little faith.
So what keeps you going? I mean, how many meetings have you been to?
I guess I don't count it that way, but I do count the things that we've gotten done for the community and which our residents and our visitors and our workforce all enjoy.
Yeah.
I think I may have had this inside me from growing up in the Washington, D.C. area. That's where I came from. I moved to Aspen in 1978, Silver Spring, Maryland. And politics tends to be a lot more front center there all the time. And so we were watching the protests on the college campuses, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Women's Movement, environmental concerns, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. All these things were packed during that time period. And again, once you have a child, you kind of leave some of the fun things of late night Aspen, and you start to think about your future for your child.
Right.
And so I wanted to follow that role model that was out there of Earth Day and these things. And this community always supported those goals. I felt like I found the perfect fit of people wanting to protect their public lands, their water, their community.
So growing up in Silver Spring, was your family in government?
No, my father was an attorney,
soup?
And my mother was an artist.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
I know. It also clearly helps inform me when you go back and see the overgrowth in those areas. Every country road my father ever took us for a ride on as kids to get out of the house on Sunday morning, it's a megalopolis. And I kept going back to visit while my parents were alive. And I think, boy, haven't they ever heard of zoning or historic preservation, or watched Little Bethany Beach, Delaware, which was a dry town, so it kind of, the development passed over it, and when they finally passed the liquor license, they tore down these wonderful Victorians on the beachfront. And, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to get out in the country on your way to Baltimore anymore.
That's right.
And then you go
That's right.
beyond, and it's still like, no, I'm in Philadelphia. What's going on?
And you know, but we're just blessed to have public lands here.
Yeah.
It's the west of the imagination, and it's a stewardship responsibility of all of us.
Yeah.
You certainly played a large role in that.
No, thank you. But this is not about me.
Okay.
I appreciate it, though. How did you find your way out here then? What's your genesis story for traveling to Aspen? And is there a van involved?
No, there was a Greyhound bus involved.
Okay.
I had probably a little bit of mother-daughter stuff in my later, 17 years old.
Right.
I worked while I was in high school at delis as chef, and also as a cashier at a Sheraton restaurant. And all my friends were kind of going to 13th grade. They have parents' money, but no real goal or responsibility. So I was going to take a skip year. And I wrote to the state of Colorado, and they sent me the visitor packet, the relocation packet. And I looked at that map, and I saw 4 ski areas that close together. I said that was it. And I sold
Were you a
my
skier back there?
Yes,
Or,
yes,
yeah, okay.
an East Coast skier.
Right.
And picking up late in life. It wasn't until you saw the real mountains that you realized how much more you had to learn, and how the real ski racers started about 8 months or something now, I think. So that wasn't going to happen, but I sold my '69 Mustang and came with $1,000 in my pocket and took the Greyhound bus across country for 3 days.
Wow.
Spent the first night in the the unrefurbished Hotel Jerome.
Right.
It was
with the bathroom down the
$17.50 a night.
hall. Yeah.
$17.50 a night, and that was too expensive, so I moved over to the Little Red Ski House the next morning.
That's great. My first night it was 11. But, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, that's a classic Aspen story, and this kind of, I came out for a season and now I've been here for 30 years.
40 years.
40 years. But how do you make that? How'd you make all of that work?
I think that this is maybe an important component. I am older now, and that gives you perspective on a lot of things. But I have lived through those challenges, and I know what it's like to, really be roommate surfing, or, my first year with the Silver King, I think we had repeated turnover with roommates who would promise to be there for 6 months and left after 3. Working multiple jobs. I would add here that the entire time I served as a city council member, I also worked full-time as an advertising distribution manager for Don and Jill Shealy at Aspen Activity Center.
Yeah.
I worked with them for 20 years. And it was a great way to get to know the community or hear input, and sometimes issues I'd been wrestling with that would take multiple paragraphs for me to explain. Somebody else could put it in 2 sentences, observing the same thing. I always really appreciate that connection with the community.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And you have one son,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And what's he up to?
Jacob
Where's
is going to be 38 on Valentine's Day. He was a Valentine's boy. And he is in Grand Junction and also in the area of the Black Canyon on the Gunnison. And for the past 3 years, he's been a fly fishing and rafting guide there, a little slice of heaven, certainly, for him. He graduated from Mesa College, Mesa State, they call it now, Mesa University, in Grand Junction with a degree in social anthropology. And kind of a sad story, but one of his true first love, coming out of college and literally some of the troubles he came out of here in Aspen. The woman he was dating, Connie Murillo, they were too young to really make it and get married, but stayed very good friends in the same working collective. They did a lot of social activism there as a group. She passed away last March from breast cancer.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
I know, and she's 39 years old, and had 2 sons, and another family who are part of that circle of people of activism. They are married and have taken them in as caregivers
Yeah.
to keep the 2 boys together. Different dads are participating, but Jacob's kind of a step-uncle, I guess, to wrap it all up. And I,
Yeah.
as close as I may become to a grandmother, I'm a step-auntie. We spent some Christmas time with them, and I try
Yeah.
to visit when I can. And so it's funny where life takes you sometimes.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's always full of challenges, and then you need to bounce back.
Well, it is, and we just, all committed to Connie and a huge community that she had developed there, that we would do all we could for her when she was
Yeah.
gone, her kids.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear that he's doing well
Yeah, he
at
is.
this
Thank
point.
you.
That's good.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
asking.
Sure. So you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
You know, all kidding aside about being a newcomer to politics, you are somebody who has a great deal of history and has been involved in a number of things. I mean, what gets you up and going to run this time? What motivates that?
Thank you for that question. There's always more to do. You know, you solve some problems incrementally. Housing and transportation will perhaps always be with us as issues that a community works to resolve, works to improve. But other things, they don't get settled forever. The Yellow Brick School was a good child care center for a while. Now we need more child care facilities, desperately. It's acute. I'd like to get back to doing things like that as I did before. I worked to make the deal happen with the school district to preserve the Yellow Brick School. We had to do the red brick first. That was a
Right.
little more critical. But we were able to preserve both of those. And we're seeing new challenges now, in particularly some of those values I talked about earlier on, public lands. The federal assault on what I believe to be the values that our community holds. It's not just about keeping the public lands in Colorado public, but we vacation in Utah and Arizona and New Mexico, and no one wants to see those desert landscapes ruined. There are current efforts to, quote, reform the Endangered Species Act, kind of wiping it out, efforts to limit public access to the studies for environmental impact statements, efforts to reform NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, lowering water quality standards, lowering air quality standards. And while I wouldn't see it as a major focus of the city, it's not that hard to raise your voice. It's not hard to give a letter of support to your senators or make a public comment. And Aspen has that sort of ability to make a difference through the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, Colorado Municipal League, and potentially the National League of Cities. I think those folks who may dominate those organizations on the East Coast need to understand our wildfire risk, what's happening to us when they cut the Forest Service by 30% of their funding and they're not able to do mitigation projects, and that it's their public lands that are potentially being sold. I think everyone I know always dreams of taking that road trip across the West and seeing those great monuments and our great national parks. And when they can shrink, I mean, it's not just Bears Ears, but they can go all the way back to Staircase Escalante and say, we're reducing the size of that. Then the Maroon Bells is vulnerable. Then everything we know and we think is settled is actually vulnerable. Other issues have come up that I think the city should at least raise its voice on, such as the high cost of individual health care in our valley. We're practically the highest in the entire country for people who are on an individual policy. They don't have a group policy, they're not on Medicare, they're not on Medicaid, and they're paying the highest rates in the country. That is hurting small businesses, it's hurting individuals. I've heard contractors who are turning away work to stay under the threshold to be able to get the Affordable Care Act
50,
subsidy.
Yeah,
And it starts to get absurd. And we have about 15% of our population in Pickens County, perhaps 17%, we're looking at the new numbers, uninsured. And that affects everyone's well-being when your community's like that. So there's been efforts at the state legislature. I have testified on bills to address these over the past few years, and we've just now seen the change this past November in our state legislature. I think we're going to see some real movement on those things, and we want to make sure they're beneficial to us, not hurting us. There are other items as well that are really perking up, like the Gallagher Amendment. And not to get too technical, it affects the rents for small businesses and for tenants through a pass-through rate ratio. And the commercial businesses are constantly...
Just a second, so that people know the Gallagher Amendment is
thank you.
how property taxes
Assessments are made.
Assessments, yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. The Gallagher Amendment tried to cement a ratio between commercial and residential properties in place 20 plus years ago. And the front range growth in residents, which is also taking a lot of our water, is so much that the commercial is bearing more and the residential is going lower.
Right.
And that is always passed through to the tenants on a triple net lease in our community and probably everywhere. It's also affecting special districts because they're not collecting the same revenues. And so whether it's school districts or CMC or other types of special districts like fire districts, they're suffering. So the state is trying to come up with some answers. And you want to have some participation or some support when those bills go forward, or making sure that they're, again, not detrimental to us. There's almost always winners and losers in legislation, and if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah.
So.
Well, those are all pretty, I don't know if it's global or interconnected kind of issues that are, how does Aspen relate to the outside world?
Yeah.
You know, how can we do that? Which is great. It makes me think of two things.
Please.
One is you have a unique position of having been on the courthouse side and on the city hall side.
Yes.
And then what are the sort of inside the boundary of Aspen issues? But let me start with the courthouse, you know, crossing Main Street from City Hall to the courthouse. How do you see the relationship, I'm curious, between the city and the county? And as you know, when I was with the county, we had, I think, 7 joint departments. Which we don't have anymore.
Yes.
But I'm curious what you think. You have a good background on that.
I do want to emphasize it's very important, and I've been commenting with Q&As about in-town issues, and I think those are predominant. But you can't say we're concerned about small business or we're concerned about our workforce and then not pay attention to those issues that affect them as well.
Right.
But moving on, what I see is there's a lot of good work between the staffs still, and with the growth of the community, the activity from 20 years ago, I think it became literally too much. And one of the best examples might be that the county separated the IT department, the information technology, not too long ago, because it just was, were we getting what we needed for the contribution to be able to reach our public, to have the right things, to advance the broadband, to be evaluating the type of new software. Eden system finally died. We're having to do migration of all of our operating systems to a new program. And so even the planning director, I think, was the first position to really split, because you're asking a planning director to try to manage things up in Meredith and the Crystal River Valley and the Airport Business Center at the same time, all this focus on in-town things. It just literally became too much. And so there's, what I see is the value of collaboration and cooperation on a lot of these other issues. The county is taking those sort of issues I've talked about forward because I brought them to the table. I said we have time for them, and I traveled to make sure our voice was heard, whether it was Club 20, which I'm still secretary of that organization, whether it was Northwest Council of Governments Water, or whether it was CCI down at the State House. And by collaborating, we don't have to have 2 different people doing this sort of thing. We can lean on some of the county's work to take issues forward. Water is one of the ones where I see so much more value and benefit of working together. I was former chair of, just passed it along a few months ago, of Northwest Council of Governments Water Quality and Quantity Commission. That's 45 different sand districts, water providers, and environmental groups throughout the headwater regions. So we're all the diverted people from Grand Junction through Gunnison, and we band together to try to make sure legislation's not going to hurt us. These things are multi-year processes to get a result. You know that as much as anyone. And I and others worked to get land use planning nexus with water use inserted into the state water plan. That was over the objection of some of those Front Range communities, but we formed a partnership and a coalition to issue a joint statement from Broomfield, the city of Denver, and Boulder, along with Eagle County, Summit, and Pitkin. And because we'd had that cross-continental relationship, they included it in the state water plan. It's become a new emphasis. It used to be the third rail. No one's
Right.
going to touch land use planning. That's
Right.
local control. But we've made sure that those sort of things go forward. I see more work that the city and the county can do together on the watershed here, and I'd like to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, what about, speaking of intractable issues,
Mm-hmm.
what about transportation for the city of Aspen? Where do you
Oh,
see that
boy.
going? Not that I want to bring
Yeah,
up a hornet's
yeah.
nest. Actually, I do, but
That's what you're here for.
That's right.
That's what we're all here for. I want to deviate for one more second
Sure.
on your first one. I also see far more collaboration and value by working together better on the housing issues. And it was not my choice, but years ago, the city and the county changed the structure of the housing board so there were no elected officials. And before then, there were. And I think that that affected communications and benefits. I remember a time when the city loaned the county the money to buy the Woody Creek Mobile Home Park because the county didn't have it, and to make that conversion happen. And so that's another reason I'm running. We have a lot of housing questions right now and housing values. And by pulling those resources together, we can solve this better regionally. So I'll leave it there. I'd go further into that. But your other question was?
well, I was going to divert you to transportation,
Okay.
but now I'm curious about housing.
Okay, yeah.
We can come back to that.
Yeah, that'll always be there.
Yeah, exactly. Because, everybody wants housing. Everybody says we need more worker housing, and it's a refrain. It could be on a flag, that this is what we do. But what does one actually do,
Yeah.
to be able to create more housing? What are we willing to trade off to do it?
That has always been the question.
Yeah.
And my experience is that we should look at these things with a critical eye and make sure any housing is appropriately scaled to the community when it's dispersed or smaller projects. The housing program support only stands on the quality of the last project that was built, how well it fits in the neighborhood. But we have other opportunities even now. Multiple, really. Burlingame Phase 3 could proceed. The planning and what you call programming and then designing for something like a BMC West. But at the same time, we have to make sure we don't lose units we already have, which is why the county stepped in to buy the Phillips Mobile Home Park over there, leaving the valley a little bit. That was going to be a scrape and replace and become 2 single-family homes. So you can't keep building here and losing there. I think, for me, and if we go back to the original 1993 Aspen Area Community Plan, our housing program isn't just about workers. It is about maintaining a sense of community from one generation to the next. It was our attempt, against all odds perhaps, with the price of free market real estate here, to maintain a community, that it wasn't just going to close all the lights at night and just be all second homes. I think that diversity has been part of our real success, and certainly the support for our nonprofits and volunteers and thinkers. So some of those values are under attack. I received a mailer from the Red Ant asking me my questions to answer, and one of those was, would I support buying down all the existing affordable housing ownership units and turning them into rental units so that we could control the people better, and we could say you've been used up, or the number of hours you have to work a year could be changed.
So
could be raised.
to make it more stridently employee housing rather than
And a control
community,
factor. That issue of, well, that way we'll all be rental, and we can say you can't retire until you're 72. Or
Right.
maybe you can't retire in your unit at all. We want you to move once you're no longer working X many hours. Or, a lot of those values that I think were part of our housing program and certainly part of the support for it, to my mind, everyone knows a school teacher who may be in the greater pool of housing or the school district's housing, or a volunteer fireman, or others. And
But we did
housing
put all
is
that
about more.
together when
Yeah.
none of us were going to get old.
That's right.
You know,
That's
and now-
right.
but now we have to kind of deal with.
Yeah,
What-
there
how
are
do you do
certainly new
that?
issues that always come
Right.
up. The capital reserve and maintenance issues are one that is of concern to me. And I actually brought with me the two different kind of battling proposals that the city and the county had put together that we hit a bit of a deadlock. And that hasn't been addressed.
Yeah.
And I feel it should be, and that with a little compromise and not just our way or we're going to dissolve the housing office, which was a little bit of a threat that came out this summer from the city side, was like, no, there's are more affordable and more manageable
Right.
ways to do this than
Right.
the city's original proposal.
Transportation, we only have a minute or two. But
Minute or two.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's
Very
some thoughts?
hopeful that the RAFTA tax, which we just passed, the new resources, integrating things like WeCycle, valley-wide system, will help alleviate it. I was mayor when we formed the Regional Transportation Authority, so I know how to work regionally to accomplish goals. But I do think we have to be realistic. The Mid-Valley growth and the increasing commuting workforce are going to be real challenges. I am not running on any sort of, quote, transportation issue, but I think it's going to come up over the next few years. These things don't go away. And I think I would be a good person at the table to make sure we have a thorough conversation about it, a thoughtful conversation, and look at where we want to be in 20 years or 15 years. If we get too caught up in the moment, we don't plan for the future.
Right.
It's better to plan and create the future you want than just always fight the future you don't.
Great.
That's what I look at.
All right. One more question.
Sure.
A little bit off topic, but how do you relax in Aspen?
Well, every now and then there's a pie baking contest at the Carbondale Mountain Fair. I really enjoy that. And I feel a little behind the curve on my campaign compared to others because I baked a whole bunch of Christmas cookies to give to a lot of the volunteers in our community and,
That's great.
and friends. And I love to garden. I have a nice little collection of columbines in front of my little deed-restricted unit at Hunter Creek because I'm on the ground floor and can do that. That sort of thing.
Great.
Hiking, walking, a little bit.
Rachel,
Thank you.
thanks
Thank you.
very much.
Great to see you.
And thank you for watching us, and hope you learned something about our newcomer to politics here, Rachel Richards, who is running to be your next council person. Thanks.
Thanks, GrassRoots.